The following opinions expressed in this program are that of Noah Waterman and do not reflect those of any other
Guys, that can't be right. Can we try that again?
The following opinions expressed in this program are that of Noah Waterman, his guests, his parents, your uncle, your auntie, your fourth grade teacher, that guy that brings his iguana to the park, the state of Mississippi, the Brian Setzer Orchestra, three babies in a trench coat, you, yes, you, in the red and blue striped polo.
This is the best game of all time.
Link, he comes to town, comes to save the Princess Zelda. Hi, folks. Welcome to the Kaiju Lounge. I'm your boss monster, Noah Waterman, and this is the only podcast that dares to do the impossible, the unthinkable, nay, dare I say, the unfathomable. Attempt to rate and rank every game ever made to find out once and for all what is the best game of all time. And I gotta say, this month, I think we've got a big one. We have caught the big fish, the big jabu jabu, if you will, because we are rating Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. This is a big one, folks. This is a big one. Metacritic, I believe, still has this ranked as their number one game of all time, right? This is critics and like armchair reviewers together coming together to say that this is the greatest game, but that doesn't matter. Metacritic's reviews don't matter. This is the list. This is the official list, TM, that will decide what is the best game of all time. And it is not the best game of all time until we, on this podcast, say it's the best game of all time. That's big news right there. For those of you who don't know, we do this podcast the first Monday of every month. We release this out where we go ahead and rate and rank a game and add to the list. Could be one game, could be four games. Today it is one game. It is the one game. It is the game for the Nintendo 64. And I'm excited. Not only am I excited, but I'm a little nervous. I'm a little nervous because, well, let's just say that this is a game a lot of people love, but I think they view it with rose-tinted glasses. I'm making that claim. I think people review this with a heavy nostalgia vibe. And I'm here with my machete of facts and machete of logic to cut through the vines of nostalgia to get to the golden idol in the center of the temple that is gaming. A little too Indiana Jones, a lot of appropriation. Got to be careful about that. But you get the gist. We're going to dive in, past all the bullpucky, and get to the heart of the matter. So I'm pretty excited about this, guys. If you're listening to the audio podcast version, then relax, enjoy your drive to work. If you're watching this on YouTube, though, I encourage you hit the like button so that others may find this video. It puts it out there into the ether, into the world, helps the algorithm, and get ready. As we dive in, myself, Michael, Lewie, Pat, the usual suspects, play, rate, rank, and review The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time.
I'll say this when we're recording too officially, or maybe we're recording now, so
yeah,
this will be in the episode. I'm very conflicted about today's game.
Really?
I'm very torn about where I'm going to... I literally have two different scores written down already because I have no idea where I'm going to land.
What's the spread? What's the spread?
Yeah.
It's not too crazy a spread. It's more just like, because I honestly, I think I'm being nice to it either way. I just
wow.
Yeah, because I was like, in my head, I had you pegged as the biggest apologist. I just kind of
I
assumed.
I probably will be in this episode, but I'll get into why I'm conflicted about this, and we've talked about this a little bit just off off recording, but yeah, I have some like philosophical like problems going into like assessing this game.
Oh,
Um,
man, this is
yeah.
gonna be deep. I can't wait.
Well, then, guys, let's get into it. Welcome, one and all, to the best game of all time, where we brave to do the unthinkable, the unfathomable, nay, the unbearable task of ranking every game ever to decide what is the best game of all time. We may be approaching what many consider the greatest game of all time. It is, and I checked, the highest ranked game on Metacritic ever, with a solid 99 aggregate score. Guys, we are tackling the very famous, much beloved Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And it sounds like we're going to tear it a new one. Joining me on this perilous journey are panelists. The only half Skulltula, half man to be on Team Handsome, Louis Thomas.
Hey.
Tingle, brought to real life, Patrick Molloy.
Oh.
Not appearing in this game.
Yeah, I was gonna say Tickle's not even in this.
It's Zelda. It's still good. And of course, Michael, I thought Zelda was the boy, Petrocelli.
Nice
For
burn.
so long. Yeah, nice.
Guys, thank you guys for being here.
of course.
It sounds
Thanks for
like we're all
having us.
excited.
Yeah, I don't know where do we want to start with this one? Because
I mean, first of all, when starting the game, what did you set your name as? That's the important question.
Ooh, you know what's funny? I had the opening segment for Get to Know Your Panelist, and it was a completely different question. But I think we're gonna have to do two questions, and we're gonna kick it off with what did you set your name in Ocarina of Time? I'll be honest, I was boring and I just said to Link. I did not give a fuck.
Capital L, lowercase INK.
Yeah, I always try to anticipate how they're going to do names, because some RPGs will always do like all caps and some don't, and it drives me nuts when I get it wrong. But like in this case, I remembered capital L, lowercase INK.
I'm not super exciting either. I just did Petro, which is always my default for most games, especially because 5 letters is easy to fit.
Yeah, as a kid, I didn't know like both this and Final Fantasy VII. I remember I named the character like I think Pat or Patrick if it fit. 7 letters sometimes was a bit of a stretch, but like to the point that I didn't know Cloud and Link as like really the character names that well. But you know, as an
you
adult,
brainwashed yourself into thinking they were both just named Patrick.
yeah, as an adult though, I hope everybody knows to put in my dude as your name. Which just is endlessly entertaining when everybody's like, "How's it going, my dude?"
Louis, anything interesting with the names?
No, I kept it to Louis. It's what I did the first time through when I played this. Ocarina of Time was the first Zelda game that I ever played before.
Me too.
Yeah, it wasn't like
Wow.
a thing that I had a ton of interest in, but then people just like talked about it enough, and I owned a 64, like, you know, and like was got an allowance, so like I had like money in a way to like check out things I was curious about.
It's like the grade school hype was real enough that it honestly that's how I ended up buying Breath of the Wild in the same way. I wasn't actually going to get it. I hadn't been paying much attention. I was like, all right, I'm excited for Snipper Clips. Let's fucking go. And I'm
That's why you were
glad I
waiting
ended
in
up
line
getting
for a launch Switch.
On to the real question that you're going to ask for Get to Know Your Panelists, because those who haven't checked in, sometimes it's a question for one of our panelists. It's hyper specific, calling somebody out. Sometimes it is a generic one for everybody. In this one, just like the one we just did, also a generic one for everybody. Actually curious about this. What is everyone's favorite not Zelda game? It's easy enough to say that Zelda Ocarina of Time has, specifically Ocarina of Time, the general Zelda series has inspired a lot of other games out there. Like so many other games take those kind of mechanics. So we're not talking about those yet, but I'd be curious to know what people's, or one that sticks with you. Like I'll say right off the bat, I loved and still do Darksiders 2. I think the Darksiders series in general, minus Genesis, that was top down for some reason, I thought did a really good job of taking half Zelda, half God of War, sort of best of both worlds, and putting them in an interesting kind of environment. I still really enjoy same level, like, oh, great, now I got a grappling hook that is really just somebody's detached arm that I'm connecting with magic, or here now I get the arrow and shit like that. I've always enjoyed that. What about you guys?
I haven't played this in a long time, and it's probably hard to find now, but there was a game on PS3 called 3D Dot Game Heroes. That was like a very deliberate like homage to old school Zelda, like top-down Zelda.
It was like a voxel style.
Yeah, you could like build
I
your own
remember
little
that.
characters and stuff like that. That game was very fun. I would probably put that up there. I'll also mention the first Darksiders. I remember having a lot of fun with. I haven't played it in a while, although I have it in my collection somewhere to be replayed at some point. But yeah, you know, as a Zelda game. But yeah, I'll do a 3D Dot Game Heroes as my top.
That is that's an Atlas game. That was
Atlas. You're right.
Yeah.
So I think my problem is, and not to jump into like the discussion of things too much, like the adventure style, like the 3D adventure style game that Ocarina of Time particularly pioneered is not a thing that I find super interesting. So it's not a thing after playing that I was then like, let me get more things that are like this. But before coming into the series, and I didn't realize it until much later because I didn't then play like A Link to the Past or any of the other ones until like well after. I had a NES game that was called Daydreamin' Davy. That was not good. It was real bad, but it was like a Bobby's World sort of thing. It was about like a kid that like fell asleep during class, and then every level was like a different
Old West jail.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was all told by an old comedian that you didn't know who he was at that age, but yeah.
But like it all, like it had a top down, like you just sort of like you got tools that would then like help you get through like a sort of cave thing. The fighting mechanics were clunky in the same way. Like and that's like really my only point of reference. Like whenever I think about like similar games to that, I know there are like other ones, like better, bigger games that are out there, but Daydreamin' Davy for the NES is
Okay, I've never heard of that game.
It's I mean, yeah, I couldn't tell you who made it. The title screen for it was hilarious because it was like really bad, like artwork of like the kid's face. Picture already.
Curious about that. I feel like I always have a pretty good knowledge of most games from that era, and all of a sudden, no, Lewie has somehow bought some of the worst of every era.
I was sure.
Even as a child, my collection had some real questionable things.
I'm sorry, this picture.
It's so funny.
That looks like a fake
geez.
Yeah, it seriously looks like, was this an unlicensed by Nintendo like bootleg cartridge or something?
This looks like up there with the MS-DOS version of Mega Man.
That's it. It sort of had like an MS-DOS sort of feel to the art. I just sent another picture of like the first level, which is like a forest like level that you're in. But
and I'll throw this on the VOD as well for this, because this is definitely okay.
Well, if there's companion content, if you want to do a Twitch stream to Daydreamin' Davy,
I'm down.
This reminds me of a much better game that I'm mad I didn't think of when you first asked me, but called Crystallis. That was also on NES. But,
that's right. Yeah,
very good game.
I'm glad that Daydreamin' Davy
really reminded me of that.
Jesus fucking Christ, Pat.
This was. Daydreamin' Davy was one of those games I specifically bought because I thought the box looked cool. And like,
oh, there you go.
Really? Where it's like the artwork did all of the heavy lifting, where I was just like, yeah, okay. And even then, the box work isn't that cool. It's not like one of those NES games where it's like there's wild amounts of action happening on it. Like it's fairly representative to what the game actually is. But
right.
I was an idiot.
It's no Cheetah Man, but yeah. I get it. Pat, what about you?
Okay, so tell me if this counts. I was really struggling, but I think that Horizon Zero Dawn would be my favorite.
Yeah, I would 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I would say most of these like epic current gen and last gen games. I think Zelda has no matter how we feel about this, you can't deny the impact that Zelda Ocarina of Time as a 3D adventure game had. I think it plays like a game that was the first in the best and worst ways. But yeah, I don't want to interrupt. You go in Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yeah, no, it's just that is the last game that I beat and then started New Game Plus immediately afterwards to then try to 100% it again. Like, 100% it for the first time, but like beat it again. And I'm super pumped about the next one. I just really like it felt like that perfect mix of like getting new tools and new abilities and stuff, and like really like the map opening up, and I don't know, everything felt like unique and interesting. I liked the backstory, I liked the storyline. And yeah, I think that's a good example. The other thing that I was thinking of was Skyrim, but I feel like Skyrim was more of just a like straightforward action, whereas Horizon Zero Dawn had a lot more of that like Zelda-esque like progression to it.
I would argue that Skyrim has a lot of like original Zelda and what Breath of the Wild came back to it, right? It's kind of like, let's just place you down. Story, kinda, but really just like figure it out.
Yeah. It definitely shares a lot of the DNA. And I've been texting Lewie about it a lot, but like I'm playing through Skyrim again right now, and I chose to be an Imperial for the first time after like 5 or 6 playthroughs, and I'm doing things I didn't know you could do in the game. Like,
oh wow,
I like characters I probably murdered because they were enemies when I walked into a room. I find out have like backstories and shit. Like, yeah, it is definitely a very different experience this time.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be. I feel like there's with so many versions of Skyrim that have come out. That'll probably be a good year's worth of episodes alone on that one.
Yeah.
I should play Skyrim one of these days. I still have never done it.
Never played
Really?
Skyrim?
No, because now it sounds. I mean, I could get it on Switch at some point when they put it on sale again, maybe.
I think you can get it on Game Boy at this point. It's on like fucking everything.
I feel like you should just wait until you can have it on VR. Like, just get Skyrim VR.
You better.
When you have a VR headset.
You better put like a helmet on me that can also feed me Dramamine or something. Because there's no way I'm getting through any VR game. Otherwise, my inner ear will rebel immediately. Honestly, I didn't. For the longest time, I didn't know you could play Skyrim third person, so I stayed away from all of those Elder Scrolls games because first person games just usually make me sick. It's hard for me to get through them.
Let's get into this game, Ocarina of Time. Game was released. I had all the information up, and then I got rid of it. Game was released November 21st, 1998. So we're nearing 25 years in this guy at this point, which if that makes you all feel as old as it makes me feel, because this is one of those games that I don't remember buying. I just knew I owned. Like, I'm not sure how it came into my possession. It just kind of did. But going back to it, I think, I don't know about you guys, definitely triggered a lot of feelings, a lot of memories, made some brand new ones. For me, my biggest takeaway was how little I gave a fuck. So I want to hear from you guys before I put myself in a position of being blasted on the internet. How did you guys feel coming back to Ocarina of Time?
So I let me try to give a little bit of the opposite feeling here. I'll just say, first of all, like, this was a game I was a big Zelda fan right from the start. I don't know if I've talked about this on recording before. I had an NES when I was like 4. My grandfather was a huge Legend of Zelda fan. He had like hand-drawn maps of the original game and like found every secret and all that stuff. So we kind of, like, my brother and I, picked up his enthusiasm for the series kind of right from when we first started playing video games. So like, I was already a big Zelda fan. I remember reading in Nintendo Power way back, like Ocarina of Time was my first, like, this game's been in development forever, can it please come out type of game, because like, I remember seeing like early images for it in Nintendo Power. I followed like the development of it a lot. Like I remember getting it for Christmas. That Christmas I was like 100% like, Mom and Dad, this is what I want.
Kind of sounds like young Tro convinced young Lewie to buy this game.
Somehow through putting that energy in the universe. But I mean, obviously there are, we'll get into them, I'm sure, the challenges of this type of game looking back on it now. And I think a lot of, especially what I would call first generation 3D like real 3D games, not like what they were trying to do on like Super Nintendo and stuff like that, like with Star Fox. Like I that stuff almost is like, you know, like a beta for what I feel like were actual, you know, starting with Mario 64 on, like the real like functional 3D games. You know, I think a lot of those things go through a lot of growing pains when you go back to look at them. And what I referenced early when we were starting that I'm very torn on this. And my big question for everyone is kind of, you know, how much do we potentially reward a game for being groundbreaking, but also punish it for aging as poorly as elements of this game has, in ways, you know, like where do you split that difference in terms of how you evaluate a game as it stands, kind of overall in the pantheon of gaming?
So I'm going to give my take on this. I want to hear everyone's take. Initially, with the idea of this podcast, was the idea of almost removing that. Is the game just better or worse, right? I recognize that's a hard task with a game like this, whose DNA is out there, and which, quite frankly, I'll get into my own feelings about it, but like when it came out, I did love this game. I also argue that I can recognize the Beatles as a band, the influence they had on music and a generation and many generations to come, but altogether now is still a dumb, stupid song for dumb, stupid babies. Any song that just kicks off with 1, 2, 3, 4, it's for preschoolers. Just because they're a great band beloved by everybody.
How do you feel about Mambo Number 5 then as a song? If we're talking about songs that lead in with counting.
A fucking classic.
What about you? What's the one that goes?
Vertigo, where he counts all the way to 14.
He goes 1, 2, 14, right? Or like,
yeah, he says 1, 2, 3.
But it's more than like the entire course of the song is all together. It's made to be a campground bus song. Like it's just, I use that example just because it's like, just because we have strong feelings and it's meant something and changed things does not still make it good. At least maybe not now. Otherwise, maybe it would still be the top song. Like
that's actually, and I'll jump on that. Like that's entirely how I feel about this game, is that like, if somebody wants to tell me that this is arguably the best game that was made in 1998, I'd be like, you're probably not wrong. You tell me whatever was critically received as like the best album of 1998 doesn't necessarily mean it's then become like that. It still holds up today. There are other albums from 98 that probably sound better now, knowing the direction that things have gone, right? Like how we sort of prioritize things differently. I think Ocarina of Time, I can understand why it was groundbreaking and like a perfect 10 then. I'm not going to say that it is now. And I'm not even going to say I had all that much fun revisiting leading up to it today. With 25 years of advancements, it's like, this isn't how I want to spend my time. It laid a lot of groundwork to be like, here's how you bridge what had happened with like what can happen in the future, but it's not fun. The limitations that the game has, I don't think make it enjoyable in the way that you almost have to compare it to Mario 64 in doing the 2D to 3D thing as well. And I think Mario 64 is a fun game despite the limitations that it technically has, right? Like as being like a pioneer for it. I don't have that same enjoyment in almost any aspect of Zelda. I think there are other Zelda games where the puzzles are better. I think there are games where the combat is significantly better. It was huge culturally, and there's a lot that like I remembered all of the music. There were some specific scenes that like still hit for me in a nostalgic way, but I personally don't think any of that matters though. Like the key core parts of it where I'm going into a game for would not pay money to like have it again on a new system or revisit the game were it not for this.
Pat, where are you on this? Because I feel like we've had some games in the past that we've gone through where you've actually specifically gone kind of towards the like you can't ignore the impact things. I'm curious to get your take on this conversation here.
Yeah, I mean, I had a very different take. I think I was I had my memories of it. I used to, if you asked me in like high school or early college what my proudest moment was, I used to tell people it was beating Ocarina of Time without the guidebook.
It still is.
Yeah, truly.
I asked him yesterday. That's what he told me.
But like I got the big Goron sword, and I remember, I think the only thing that I hadn't done on the game, I don't think I had gotten all the Skulltulas, and I hadn't gotten the final big Poe, but I had like gotten everything. I'd really like worked my ass off on that game, and like Lewie was saying, it was my first Zelda. Like to me, like the character of Ganondorf and like the storyline that one told was like just it for me. It helped that then Majora's Mask built off of the same link, and then later I had to like break my brain and be like, because I think after playing it went back to play the Super Nintendo one, and I was like, what the, like Link doesn't have a sister, like what the fuck is any of this, like or maybe what, no, maybe it was just even
Link to the
yeah
Past.
it was a sister in Wind Waker, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it was Wind Waker then that came out later that I was like, wait, what? Like now I have to learn a new thing. But anyway, I have to say that I had my memory of it. I knew that I liked it back then, but I was kind of impressed again about how deep and wide the world felt. Like there were so many different characters, and you catch them at like different times because of the 7-year gap. Like I thought that the story told a really like kind of melancholy thing. I think the story holds up really well. I think the depth of the world and like storytelling are really good, and like I kind of was pulled back in again. I was kind of like, even things that I could like remember happened, I was like, the sages kind of just die at the end. Like, and I was like, yeah, that is what happened. They like choose to like sacrifice themselves to keep Ganondorf like locked away, and I was like, that's sad. Like,
which according to the official Zelda timeline, which is its own level of bullshit we can get into a little bit later, obviously didn't work because Ganon comes back in games that take place after that.
well, I mean, the thing is, Zelda says it, they can only ever lock him away for a certain amount of time. Like basically,
that's building
Right.
in an escape clause. That's smart.
yeah. She says like, we can't hold him forever. At the very, very end of the game, she's like, yeah, it's just, we're gonna try our best, but it's the Triforce of Power. He'll come back just like we will, like whatever.
She looked right at the camera while she's
Even though I named him my dude, she said Patrick. It was really weird.
So
For $60 more, you'll have to save Hyrule again.
Yeah, right.
So Troy, I want to circle back to all your responses to that, but I do want to kind of throw a caveat based on something Patrick was saying. And like, I came in hot with saying I couldn't give a fuck early on, and I will say this much: like, I do think the story holds up. I do think you do have to kind of recognize that before Ocarina of Time, Zelda the series did not have character, right? The early Legend of Zelda games were fun. I actually tried to replay A Link to the Past, and like I kind of the same thing where it's like I had trouble sticking with it. But Zelda the series didn't really start having stories and lore and this kind of feeling to it until Ocarina of Time. That really gave it, and any game that's come after that has built on that lore. Not necessarily, it's maybe alluded to other things, but it's really built on the characters and stuff that game established. And I think even from that standpoint, we wouldn't have gotten so many of these great Zelda games that we've gotten without it.
It is interesting to see how much of the subsequent Zelda series is Nintendo reckoning with the impact of Ocarina of Time in different ways.
Yep.
I will just say one thing about not like A Link to the Past actually has a decent amount of lore to it. It's just it was still kind of an early enough video game that outside of like a handful of moments that were text boxes that you could easily scroll past and things in the instruction booklet, like it was easy to miss a lot of it.
Well, I mean, in that retrospect, Mario has lore to it as well. The first one,
it is pretty wild. It is wild to go back and read. If you like find a printout or whatever, a digital version of the instruction booklet from the original Mario Brothers, do yourself a favor and read some of the stuff that they wrote in there, because like Bowser's like an evil wizard and like stuff like that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to see like the not just the influence that the game had in terms of its own, and I think maybe we'll save the gameplay part because I feel like that's the part that's going to be the most contentious for like how Ocarina of Time like is divisive for folks going back to it. And what makes
I'll say right now that's 90% of my of what got in the way for me.
Yes,
like
totally,
we'll save
totally
that.
fair.
I agree. Let's save it at the end. But like, yeah,
one story piece I liked this time that I didn't really pick out before. Maybe because like when I was a kid, I didn't think about it on this level. But like, you know, you do the whole adventure. The first part of the game, you're just Kid Link, and like you meet Zelda, and you kind of the deities of Hyrule kind of pull you into this adventure, and you think you're going to stop Ganondorf, and then it ends with Ganondorf kind of being like, what do you think was going to happen? You're just kids, you idiot. Like, I'm a grown man. Of course I've got this figured out. Like, yeah, I followed you to the stupid temple and now I'm going to get what I wanted. Like, you're just a 10-year-old. Why did you think you could save the world? And I really liked that element of it because I feel like so many other games would have you were just a kid and you just won.
yeah.
And this was the first game that I can think of playing that, you know, even if it didn't say it as bluntly as I just did, like the idea that like, yeah, of course you can't save the world when you're a child. You're going to have to like try again.
It's kind of like, why didn't Mr. Wilson just call the cops on Dennis the Menace early on and just take care of that kid once and for all? Like, come on now.
Yeah. Like that reveal that like everything you did was just helping Ganondorf do what he wanted to do was I think an interesting wrinkle for, you know, Nintendo famously not very story heavy in a lot of their games. I think did an interesting thing there, and I really appreciated that this time around.
Lou, you're on the same page as me right now as far as kind of these sort of feelings towards it. I think we're feeling a little more down on it right now.
Mm-hmm.
What did you like about playing it this time around?
It does a lot of things right. Patrick like really hit. I think melancholy is the perfect word to describe like what the game is. And revisiting it, I was really surprised. Also, because probably like when I was playing it the first time through, and like being a much more casual gamer at the time, like I'm probably like blasted through a lot of the initial story and didn't care because I was expecting a very different game out of it when I was younger. And I think one of the things for me at the time in playing it, like that I'll give it, is that like it kind of like moved me from being somebody that was only interested in video gaming casually to something that was like deeper. And for me, it was one of the first games that provided something that was like, that felt very cinematic at times. But like, you know, it was something where it's like, oh, this is interesting. And I'm actually like, my mom remarked one time, like I remember coming in and playing it the first time through, that I was just like sitting back and like watching like a thing happen. And she was like, that's wild, you know. And I do think like a lot of the flavor and feel, obviously for like where it's text and, you know, and it's top down, like those old Zelda games couldn't do that. I think it does that well. I really like, and I don't know if it's because it's the first one, I like the character designs a lot from those, in a way where I both simultaneously get annoyed that I think Nintendo doesn't try to venture hard enough away from like, what did the Gorons look like, or what did the Zoras look like, you know, like sometimes like I get annoyed when it's like, this looks too different from what it was in Ocarina of Time. But then also I'm like, you're not deviating enough for me. Like it's like you're changing it up a little bit, and it's like either go big. It's like when other people try to do the Joker in the animated series and they try to do Mark Hamill, and it's like either do something completely different or get it exactly right.
You're
but
both
like,
too close and not close enough for this to be okay.
Right. But like I like that world. I like the costuming that Ocarina of Time specifically does a lot. And yeah, and I really enjoy like the overall the story aspect, like the time jump, you know, of 7 years. It's sort of like with Breath of the Wild, where it's like you more or less lose, right? And then like and then like what you're doing as adult is coming back to like, you know, to do it again. The vast difference in like everybody's life during that like 7-year time, the people that have had to endure, it's like, oh, that is tough. Like that puts a very interesting and epic scope like to the entire story. It's all of those things, like the world building and the feel, I do think are really incredible with the game, but I don't think those are the parts that I like, and I'll stop there. But I don't think that that's enough to really to move the game forward. Like for me, if then the game that is behind it itself isn't.
So
You know.
I want to jump the time. This is going to be a little bit of a non sequitur. I want to jump to the time jump a bit because I don't know if this stuck with any of you, but it stuck with me. You go in as Kid Link. You fast forward through time. Assumedly, Link has been gone, and this is why Ganondorf can take over. Why, when Link comes out the other side, he suddenly has an earring? Where did he get his ear pierced?
So
what? Explain this to me.
Yes, he's asleep in the spirit realm. So technically, maybe somebody in the spirit realm pierced him while asleep. It does mean that his body grew like as he was in a coma, essentially. But
Right.
what's his face? The one of the six sages, the guy that's also the owl. He tells you that he tells you that you've been asleep for 7 years.
So some motherfucker comes in, changes his clothes occasionally, pierces his ear against his will.
Yeah, cleans up his, pee or whatever.
Yeah.
Because leaving, changes out his bedpan.
Yeah.
In the sacred realm.
And pierced his ear. Yeah, I guess it was Rauru that did it, like he
puts one of those like ab trainers on his body because he's still pretty toned when he comes out the other side.
Not only toned,
those
but
shocking devices.
Yeah.
Like the first thing he doesn't do when he stands up is like pins and needles and then falls down.
Yeah.
Just muscle atrophy everywhere.
It's just if you zoom in at the top of the Temple of Time and you go in, it actually says Claire's at the top. It's just hard to make out because of the old textures.
I want to kind of piggyback on something else you talked about, which was the storytelling aspect and really the cinematic aspect. Like the game does a good job of kicking you in with sort of the blackness, the story, and then this huge sweeping camera shot. And you can only really describe it that way because you hadn't been seeing that much in anything else through the entire Kakariko village. And I will say they do a good job of any chance they got, they tried to make it feel cinematic. Mm-hmm. Low angles on Ganondorf and he's rearing back on the horse and all in game. Because you could have easily done that with like pre-rendered cutscenes. And I remember like those pre-rendered cutscenes were pretty cool in like Final Fantasy VII, but they were also grainy as shit and like always felt super pre-rendered. And it's like, okay, great. Let me stop the action, load for 5 seconds, and then bring this in. Like the fact that it did all these great cinematic moments and did them in game and in engine, I thought definitely helped with the sort of the gravitas of the overall story and the overall feeling.
Yeah, I even the friggin' you're sitting there at the title screen and Link rides by on Epona and the music starts. Like I do like have that like feeling memory of doing that as a child, turning it like putting it in the system, turning it on for the first time, and just having that appear over top of that.
And that's I mean, it deserves its own thing to just talk about the music in general, but the song alone, first off, that sort of like you can just let that run in the background. I mean, none of us have kids, but like let that lullaby someone to sleep because that is just such a beautiful piece. And then the fact that there's like so many great memorable songs from this game that all stem from the limitation of you only have 6 notes to do it. Mm-hmm. How do we make this many great songs out of just 6 notes?
Oh yeah, but how many of them like were still in your brain? Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, I have to say too, like I know we haven't gotten to gameplay yet necessarily, but like the concept of like play a song to make it storm or like change the time of day, or I appreciate also the fact that this game let you like summon your horse with a song. Like I feel like a lot of that stuff is just so standard now, but it still felt interesting in this playthrough. I think it felt very layered. I think the game felt like it had a lot going on, a lot of different aspects, a lot of different tools, a lot of different like little ways to like manipulate things.
Right. I think maybe this could be a bridge into some of the things we'll be more critical on gameplay wise, but having a different song, as cool as it was to have all the different music, having a different song for fast travel where you had to play a different song for every location you had to go to. After a while, I was like, Majora's Mask did it better, where it was just the one song and it pulls up the thing and you pick it, and like that's why
that was the owl, right?
Yeah, yes. The owl is actually like useful in friggin' Majora's Mask and only shows up like once, as opposed to all the times he pops up in Ocarina of Time. Where I was and if you click too much through the text, then he'll say, "Do you want me to repeat myself?" And it like defaults to yes.
The fact that yes was the default was a truly insane.
Is monstrous, monstrously unfair.
As he like flips his head upside down. But yeah,
knowing exactly what you're doing. I think that was on purpose.
Oh yeah,
stupid owl. But yeah, it was. It's definitely a thing that felt very novel. But then I think they very quickly got away from some of that indulgence, and it's interesting to look. I know we're going to rag on the gameplay of this thing a lot as we get into it.
I'm going to defend some, so
I will too. But some of the stuff is hard to defend, especially like controls and things like that. I will just say, like, going into this game as like from the viewpoint of like, I hesitate to use the word research, but that's kind of what it was to talk about it. Was that made a lot of this more interesting to me than I think if I were just sitting down to be like, what's a fun game I want to play? And I think that colored my experience a lot this time around.
That's very interesting. The thing, just in general, always something to think about is the nature of how we approach a game colors the actual experience of playing the game itself. Because I think I probably was coming in a little more critical just because I know in general in life, I'm very anti rose-colored glasses. I feel like the idea of coming into something and thinking something's great just because you're nostalgic for it is a mistake. And so I think I already had maybe a little bit of a chip on my shoulder before getting into playing this, which may have colored things a little bit. But I also think I'm right, so it's fine. So let's get into that, guys. I say I actually only have probably one major gripe with this game, but it was a big enough gripe that I did not want to continue to finish it this playthrough. Like for the record, there's been a bit of a time between the last time we recorded and this for various reasons. And so we've had a good while with this game. And I probably stopped playing within 2 weeks after our last recording, which I argue was probably a month and a half ago. So I've had this time to come back to it and play it, and I've just not wanted to.
Yeah, it's wild because you've still been stuck on the Super Nintendo Aladdin game. You continue to play that one to this day.
Which is funny because of how fast I was able to beat the carpet level with no problem. So
carpet level. Just because you love pots with chicken feet. I don't know what it is.
Doesn't. I can break pots, but only if they have chicken feet. But for me, the lack of a free roaming camera in a 3D game where I have to find my enemy and try not to bump into them and kill them drove me insane. And like technically Mario 64 doesn't have a free roaming camera, but I can still control the camera in some capacity. The fact that every single time I need to adjust the camera, I had to move my character in that direction, hit a button to realign it, and hope that was enough.
Did they change that in the 3DS version? Do you know?
No,
they did not in the 3DS version because they did a lot of other great.
The 3DS. I was going to talk about it later. The 3DS version because I have a pretty decent memory of playing that, but because I'm pretty confident they did not, because the 3DS didn't by default have an extra like stick. Like the new 3DS had that little nub, but this was made for the original one, so it still had that. It had things like gyro aim and stuff like that, which I really missed in the original version of the game that I played.
Well, yeah, so there were things like being able to, I know, like when you're in first person with the arrow, being able to kind of like control that, which like was so much better than trying to just nudge things, hoping you got exactly right and just sliding around the place. Like I probably spent a half hour on that fucking squid mini boss in the Jabu Jabu temple, just running around in circles because I didn't know how to get close enough to the spikes to catch up. but too far, and I was going to get hit. So I just spent an entire hour trying to measure what that was, knocking myself silly every 5 minutes and making no fucking progress because I can't change the camera to see the spikes and how close I am in that spin. Like, I don't know, that the whole aspect of the actual controls of the game alone was enough that by the time I got to Adult Link, I was like, I played half the game. I'm fine. This is great. Okay, I have my opinions. Let's go.
So do you think that do you think that it just, because we all played it as kids, like it's pretty clear we all played this as a kid. I don't remember struggling with it when I was young. Like, do you think that now that you've just like, it's almost like playing Tony Hawk and then you go back to try to play the original, you can't manual. Like, do you think that it's just like over time you got so used to being able to control the camera that in games that you can't, like, it locks you up? Or
I think that's part of it. I think it's realizing, though I remember it being difficult then too. I don't think it bothered me as much because I think I was still at an age of wonder and excitement, and it was a new game. So like I think, and because I didn't know the story, I wanted to see where it goes. Like, I think there is an element of like, now having played it, and now that it in general is in the it's mythology in the zeitgeist in the same way that like Greek mythology or the Transformers mythos is, that like
the two big
the two big religions, the way I see it.
The Mount Rushmore of mythology.
It's in there enough that like the excitement of, oh, I can't wait to see what's around the corner is gone, but the gameplay limitation is still there. So now I've removed, and so I think this is actually a good way to check me on my shit, because that's a fair point. I need to take in consideration the fact that I played it before. If it was the first time, I don't know, maybe, but also like if it was my first time now, enough people have aped this story that it's not special anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think the thing now that's probably challenging for you, and I would assume for others maybe, is that we've just had so many more games that have improved upon how you travel through a world like this, and how, like, you know, the idea of a two-stick setup where one stick controls the camera, which just wasn't a thing, especially on the N64 controller, which was its own unique creation. Right. And honestly, no, I think the thing I struggle the most with is if I hadn't played this before, I think I would have much less patience for how it controlled than I did as someone who still somewhere has that kind of adaptability of that I did as a kid, where I could just kind of get used to how some of it controlled, even if I knew it wasn't optimal.
Yeah, so wait, actually, I don't know if we've talked about this before when it's come to like 64 things, but did you hold on the ends, or were you guys like center inside? Okay.
Sorry, I'm holding on my hands.
So honestly, it depended on the game. And I think that's because there are some games where the controls were more localized to like the D-pad, right, or something else versus not. So it really depended on what I was playing and what I knew were the buttons that I needed, which is what I think what I believe is the beauty of the N64 design. It's a weird controller, but it's a controller that means that you have to play with it different every time, almost in the same way that the Wii mode is something you have to play with different every time. Yeah, like I think it because of the nature that maybe one game needed these more, I could hold it like this one time and then hold like this for something else. Is a flaw in that you obviously have to relearn how to play a game every time, but also makes the controller more versatile than having to fit a standard scheme for every game.
I really wonder what though the thinking was. Like I would love to have been in those R&D meetings where it's like, let's put three handles on this thing.
It's just wild because there was no and this kind of goes into the game design too of stuff like Ocarina of Time. It is like there was no standard for any of like how this put together, and that comes out in the control too. Like they didn't fucking know what they were doing. They're all right, well, we know we need a control stick because it's 3D movement, and like I guess we'll have some buttons that will ostensibly be the camera in some games and then not in others.
Well, it sounds like hedging your bets, right? Like,
Yeah.
what if, and honestly, it's smart in retrospect. What if 3D doesn't take off? What if 3D is a fad? Well, great. Now you have a useless joystick, and you still got your D-pad, so you can play Super Mario World Collection on the 64 if that was ever to happen. Like, you couldn't play a lot of those 2D games with a joystick. I think it'd feel weird, but you could play some classic, or like, I think I had like the Space Invaders 64 or whatever that was, that I think did use the D-pad over that. So I think and that was all 2D. That wasn't a 3D thing. That was just 2D with nicer graphics. So I think it almost felt like they were trying to be safe, and in being safe, they're trying to please everybody. In a it is a very unique design for sure.
Did Bomberman 64, was that the one where you could use the joystick or the D-pad? Because I feel like that might have been one that I remember specifically using the D-pad to try to be precise with my movements.
I don't think that
that wasn't it. I think one of them.
I can't imagine that Bomberman 64 would have been useful to use the D-pad at all, because that game was like fully three-dimensional when it shouldn't have been.
Yeah. That was the game where like it had like the story world aspects where you're actually walking around, and like they didn't have the only 4 directions. It had everything.
And they literally only the 3D gameplay like Bomberman Hero did. The best game on 64.
I like literally only ever played the multiplayer on Bomberman 64.
That's the right answer. That's fine.
Well, I'd asked about the controller thing because like I found, for me, because I only ever played holding on to both ends. I never played any game with it in the center, because I was like, I can hit everything with my hands all the way across.
Big ass thumbs.
and I was fine with that. So but like that also meant that I could just like, from holding it on the ends, like I could use either hand where I didn't need more of it to work other buttons, to flick the Z trigger really quickly. And when I played on an emulator and then just mapped that to a back shoulder button and still could just flick my middle finger in the same way, I was like, oh, this makes it easy for me to do like the very like herky jerky turn, boom, flip, center the camera, like that I had to do in playing Ocarina of Time. So like that part didn't bother me a ton. It's not ideal, but I still had that memory. I think, maybe to the point being made that like, had this been a new experience to me, I'd be like, this whole game can fuck off, because like it makes no sense that you would have to control something like this way. But like doing it, I was able to get that muscle memory back. My biggest problem was, it's like, I don't know, even the camera was off center. I was like, I never felt like I really needed to see what was going on, because there's truly ever no action. I get an adventure game, you don't have to be like heavy on the action, but Jesus Christ, was everything so slow and so not exciting. The fighting mechanic was trash. The boss fights were awful. There was maybe like 2 interesting bosses and 1 good sub boss. Shadow Link, best fight in that game for my money, and that's it. Everything else, not great. And I get, you don't go into a Zelda game to be like, what I want is top-notch combat. Like there are other things that do that better, but like,
yeah, I gotta say, I felt the tension. I felt like all the bosses were like kind of scary, and I don't know. I felt that like panickiness again of being like nervous that they were gonna get the upper hand, or like the re-deads scared me again. The likes scared me again.
I mean, I'm with you on that. I felt the tension too after spinning around that fucking circle for a half hour and my thumb.
Noah's still on that boss fight.
I'm literally have it running on automatic on a different computer right now.
There's like, I think the designs are good, and like that's obviously a way to like get you into care. But like I didn't find like not seeing things. It wasn't stressful in a way that like a Resident Evil and like not being able to see what's happening and then quickly doing it was, I don't know. I mean, also just like the core mechanic of Zelda games where it's like, you're going to die, you're going to come back, it's going to be fine. Like you're going to push through it. Like, I don't know.
I was thinking about this earlier too, but that you're comparing it to Resident Evil is a good point, is that it's different when a game, you can talk about your frustrations with fixed camera, with those games too, but at least those games and like, the early like Devil May Cries and stuff like that were designed around having fixed camera angles. So everything was that the game design kind of all fed into that, whereas this doesn't. This is a fully 3D world that you're expected to interact with and move about as you like, but then it has not fixed camera that you can just constantly readjust. And so I think you run into frustrations that you wouldn't run into with it in like a Resident Evil or something, because the game is built around those cameras only pointing in specific directions.
I also enjoyed that it's tied to Navi. Like,
yeah,
she is the reason that you can like do that you can look at things, even to the point that in the Ganondorf fight, she's like, his dark energy is pushing me back. I can't help you. You have to volley this ball of light back and forth all on your own. Like,
yeah, I do like that Ganondorf watched his own like clone do that fight and lose, and then was like, I'm better at tennis than my clone, I can do it. So just tries the same thing. I will say, Lewie, one of my favorite sub bosses, and I think it doesn't come up until way too late in the game, are the Iron Knuckles. I think those are also kind of fun to fight, but you don't fight them until like the last temple.
Right.
yeah.
And so it's a shame that like more fights that honestly just kind of got into the appeal of just like beating on a thing like with your sword, since there was no depth to the combat, didn't have more opportunities to just kind of get into that very like primal joy of doing that.
Yeah, the Iron Knuckles are great. The fact that the armor breaks off and they're a lot fucking faster, that really is a pretty neat gameplay thing. I also loved all the sounds that all the characters, like, I didn't remember a lot of like the noise that these enemies made as they were attacking you and stuff like that. And again, the Re-Dead really freaked me out. I remember they actually scared me when I was a kid, and I had nightmares about them. I love that the game goes out of its way to say, like, they're not zombies. Like, these aren't dead people. They're just a weird, like, mud evil magic, like, thing of sorrow. Like, don't worry.
Someone in Nintendo, like, PR was like, we can't have walking corpses in this game. Yeah.
Probably. Because, I mean, everybody's gone in the town. Or, like, most people are gone in the town. So you're like, there's a Re-Dead exactly where each human was.
Yeah.
Like, no. Don't worry about it. Just bad magic. It's okay.
So what's worse for you guys? Re-Deads or the hand?
Oh, the grab you and
the wall masters. No, what I didn't like this time was that weird mini boss you fight a couple times. That's all the hands coming out of the ground and the weird like big mouth face thing that like.
Oh yeah, that like just ugh.
It's kind of like walking like this, and then if everyone
that's true.
That
we talk about character design. Zelda has some of the weirdest character design in that some of them are really cute and anime and adorable, and some of them are just dark and freaky as hell. Like it feels. I mean, obviously it's done on purpose, but it's so out of place compared to everything else. The Re-Deads, the hands, whatever the fuck that thing is, like
the Skulltula people,
the Skulltula people,
fucked up looking. Yeah,
God, why would you include that? Like, just have them be Skulltulas. Why do they have to have like hands growing out of their face, like the fucking thing? Like,
they're cursed. They're bad people. They're cursed.
I'm not bad. You don't have to do that to me. I don't have to look at that shit. Come on now, Pat and Tro, like. You guys are a little more on the positive end of this. What are the things you guys didn't like about this?
Didn't like.
I
had one more thing to talk about that I liked, or at least like a weird memory.
Let's hear it. Let's get that out of the way now.
I forgot how horny this game was, and I know I was like a burgeoning like cis straight child, like coming into it, like my own understanding. But I remember being like, oh my god. Rudo is like completely buck ass naked. The
Great Fairies.
Yeah, the Great Fairies. Like, come on. And also,
the Great Fairies have always been horny.
Yeah, so they're pretty horny in all of them. But,
yes, that is true. But they're also like, everybody is also horny for Link. Like, they're like, everybody kind of makes comments about like how cute he is when he's little and how manly he is when he's big. And I think that actually had a lot to do with my like, becoming my own adult. Like, I jumped 7 years forward when I was playing this.
That explains what you looked forward to, and yeah, now you've become basically the adult version of Link. Visually, you look exactly the same.
Yeah, your fiance jumped out of a pool of water, and like the camera panned over her, and that's how you knew that was
it was real.
But yeah, those pans and everything, I was like, man, this is tickling something deep inside of me.
This is awakened something.
Yep. It was Link's Awakening.
Hey, there it is.
Hey.
You were asking about things I'm critical of.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I feel like in what we've recorded, I'm feeling very much like the Nintendo apologist every time we talk about Nintendo games. But it was my childhood, so I guess I'm trapped. But like the stuff I guess I wasn't that jazzed about it. It was mostly like technical things that were just kind of annoyances, like navigating Epona the horse in ways where, like, especially in Hyrule Field, where you're like, that ramp is not that steep, horse, you can definitely go over that. Or I was definitely approaching that fence in a way where you should have jumped over, and instead you just stopped in your tracks and then did the rear up thing and like walked backwards like a few paces. And I was like, I did a lot of side quest stuff this time around, which kind of makes me excited to replay Majora's Mask, because that's what a lot of that game is. But there was stuff like hunting the big pose and having to do the trying to do the arrows on horseback is like a cool idea that they clearly just didn't. It's another one that the 3DS remake makes a lot more manageable through like gyro aim and stuff like that. It's just a lot more smooth. But trying to get that stuff going was frustrating. Honestly, the horseback riding stuff, as novel as it is probably, for me, the roughest part to go back to control wise, because it's the same control mechanics that you're used to in terms of the camera, and now also the horse is only kind of operating at a suggestion of your movement versus like Link kind of turns on a dime, and Epona does not do the same.
Yeah
I think for me, the thing that I'd be most critical of is that, like, now, again, at the time, it was like a pretty groundbreaking game. Although, as we were talking about 1998, I think that's the same year that Half-Life and StarCraft, like other
That's
games.
crazy to think about.
I will argue different genres, but you're right in terms of like a lot of genres being defined in 1998. Yeah.
Yes, and to those games' credit, like Half-Life, I'd have gone back and played it as it like originally was, but it even felt a little bit more full and like detailed and stuff. Like, I know it was a PC game and this is console, but like Zelda, going back to it, felt empty in a lot of places. Like, the storyline was deep, the fact that there were so many different characters and stuff like that. But as far as like Lost Woods or Hyrule Field or like so many places, it just felt vacuous. And it is just because of the time and because of the constraints technically. But like, while I'm being critical, it's just, I felt very much like I walked into what was supposed to be like a thriving town, and it felt like a bland box with like 4 characters in it. Even the celebration video at the end of when everybody gets together, it's clear that like they rendered it in game, which we were talking about how that's impressive. But it's like 3 people at a fire, and then it has to like cut over to a different part of the field and show just like Talon and his brother, to be like, oh god, like we can't have 6 people on at the same time.
I like that it's kind of like the Ewok celebration at the end of Star Wars if they removed all the Ewoks.
Yeah. Oh, did you notice? I had to look this up because I was curious as I was checking it out. But Talon is wearing a Bowser brooch.
Oh, really?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he has a small Bowser head on his chest, and I don't know if you noticed, but as you're running up to the final fight, it like definitely is a callback to the infinite stairs on the way to Bowser. Like,
yeah,
I was like, wait a second, am I ever getting to the top of this? Like, yeah, it was clear that they were like still horny for Mario 64,
and rightfully so. I mean, arguably the better game of the two, but also that was the Kickstarter that basically was a classic upon release, totally. And they probably had I think there were a lot of ideas just shared because both were in production actually at the same time, even if they weren't released at the same time.
That makes sense.
So there was a lot of I think there's a lot of shared ideas there. I was just speaking of production, I was reading something very interesting about it, that Zelda was initially, or Ocarina of Time was initially planned to be a first-person game, which would have been really interesting. That was the initial idea that Shigeru Miyamoto was pushing for, and it got shot down partially because it kind of ruins the idea of seeing young Link become adult Link if you can't see Link.
Just put some mirrors in the game, and the perspective difference, done deal. But,
Yeah, I'm sure
that
those
makes a
mirrors
lot
will
of
look great in
sense.
64 graphics.
I mean, that does make a lot of sense, though. Why, like, shooting the bow and arrow and stuff like that did actually, it didn't feel perfect, but it was interesting. Like, it felt like an interesting thing to have in the game.
Yeah, I would say I think so much more of it would have been like if the whole game was first person. It explains right the bow and arrow mechanics, the hook shot, aiming the bomb shoes, like
The numerous like tight corridors that you'd have to crawl through, even if you can't control the fucking camera.
Right, like
that would have been really wild. I mean, it could have failed or it could have succeeded, but it definitely would have been interesting if we were talking. Then we would be like, wow, yeah, Skyrim just lifted the whole fucking thing and made it stand, like.
But I also think there would be a lot of like, I don't know, Wind Waker as the first, like, I don't know, like I think things like Wind Waker wouldn't have happened. Breath of the Wild probably wouldn't. We probably wouldn't have gone back to that. Like that would probably be more like Skyrim at that point. Like,
yeah,
I think that there's so many, definitely the right choice. The route they took with it, like, made more sense to make Metroid first person than it did to make Zelda first person for this one.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I want to talk a little bit like the emptiness to it. It's funny that you took that as emptiness, because there's an element. I just want to get everyone's takes on this, because Troy, I'm with you. Like I'm typically a Nintendo apologist too. Same thing. Did not have any of the systems except Nintendo growing up. But even when I did play the other systems, none of the other systems and none of the other games ever had the level of, I'm going to call, sandbox feel that 64 games had. Mario, Zelda, so many 64 games had an element of like, I feel like I'm just in a giant sandbox and I can move around and play with everything. Like even down to something like, I don't know if you guys remember doing in Mario Kart 64 on, I think it was Peach's Raceway or whatever, of being able to take that side track out and find the actual castle.
To the castle.
There's a level of like official boundary breaking that all 64 games feel like you can kind of do, but they just feel satisfying to run around in big circles in, that like I never saw in PlayStation or Sega Saturn games. And I don't really feel like I have that in now, when arguably there's so much more you can do in the games now. Like I'll go back to Mario 64 and it feels very, like a term, sandboxy. Like you just get to play around in this hub world. What do you guys feel that same way? Do you guys have the same feeling from these games? And if so, why do you think that is?
I'll say, actually, I meant to bring this up at some point. The fact that you could pull the hat off the fisherman, I didn't like. Right, like that. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think for me, it's just like, it is just purely that now in games you could have like 15 people in a room and the game won't like shut down on you.
It can get more crowded.
Yeah.
It can be tighter. Yes,
is what I mean when I say empty. But I do love and I do miss a lot of times that feeling of like even Mario Kart 64 jumping off of Rainbow Road and landing like halfway down of course everybody fucked it up all the time, but
yeah, naturally
that like ability to like, the wall is there but you can hop over it kind of shit. Like I do appreciate that, and I do see that a lot in Ocarina of Time and in 64 games.
I also wonder if it's partly I'm just, as I'm thinking about it, the flat nature of it all, right? You're not rendering grass, you're not rendering, so it just looks like you're running up giant ramps and running over giant flat. It always feels like you're actually running across what is essentially like thick preschool play mat in various forms, as opposed to now you go to a game, it's like it looks like you're running across grass.
Yeah. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, it is just a thing. It is an artifact of the time where I feel like I noticed it a lot more. I feel like as a kid, I probably was like, oh my God, like there's like a shopkeeper and like, look at that weird little thing in the background. But yeah, now I'm like, oh, okay, that's it.
I'm playing through the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic right now for the first time.
Yeah.
And that has a very similar feel of being like, oh, this game is big in the same, to the point of feeling like vacuous, when it's like, I actually wish it would have been smaller. I get for the time it was probably really cool to like pick your team and like run around these very samely rendered like large environments, but I'm like, you could have cut this by like a good 20%. Like I don't need to explore something that looks like this blocky and like this the same. Again, knowing full well that I'm sure at the time people are like, oh my god, the exploration, the way that it's like you're on a frontier is probably like really cool. So like that is something I'll be a little more kind about, like not knocking, because it's like I'm sure that was like a nature of like the
yeah, there's a lot of like, we can build this, so we did. Isn't that kind of cool that there's this big space you can run around, like Hyrule Field in Ocarina of Time is that, right? Like, it's a field that has literally nothing but like these crazy like pineapples with razor blades that like fly up out of the ground if you wander too far into like the periphery, but like otherwise, and like skeletons come out at night, but otherwise there's nothing to do in it. It was like the coolest thing ever when you were a kid to be able to like go to this huge space and be like, look how big this field is, and like run around. And now every other time I'm like, man, the sun moves awfully fast through the sky, and all the castle gate's going to close again right before I fucking get to the castle.
Right, and then you have to wait, because you can get just close enough to them to close on you, but you have to wait another 5 fucking minutes.
I beelined it to get that sun song as fast as I could this playthrough, so I didn't have to sit around for that. But yeah, right, it's just like, it wasn't a design priority that they like thought of practically how would this feel to like go back and replay in like 20 years. It was just like, isn't it cool that we made this big thing?
I will say, like, and to your point, no, like it is interesting, like you brought up the idea of like how like like every N64 game kind of felt like sandboxy, because like there's this like weird thing where it's like with all of it, there is like, I mean, like in Mario 64, even outside of like running around the castle, just like the basic, like you can sit and like pull on his face like all day, like on the menu screen, right? Or think of like every other not as good Mario 64 ripoff that came off that worked on the same prep, like Rocket Robot on Wheels being like, you're in this broken amusement park, but then you like jump into these stages. Glover worked on the exact same principle. Chameleon Twist had like, you know, they all have like this
Silicon Valley.
Yes,
Hey, that was a good one.
They're all things where it's like they had like a, I guess like what was pioneering at the time, like play style. So maybe they were just like, some of the emptiness is at like, wouldn't it just be fun to like play around, you know, like in this thing? And I will say there are games sometimes where like new games I don't think really give you the space to explore or to be like as dumb as you'd perhaps want to with some of these things. So it's interesting to see these games go like swing too big in the other direction, you know, instead.
I think part of the problem too is just like the internet, and not just because the internet was around when this game came out, but like the internet and YouTube like play videos and stuff like that as they exist now, like every Easter egg is like detailed out, and because trophies exist, like they're like, you know, now if, and not necessarily on a Nintendo system, but on like if Mario Kart 64 came out on Xbox One Series X or, you know, whatever, they would be like, there's a trophy for driving to Peach Castle, there's a trophy for jumping off Rainbow Road and landing further down,
right,
there's a trophy for like, you know, going in reverse at the start of a race. And like people just like both seek those things out or like look it up, or people are talking about it all the time in a way that like, man, I really sound like an old head, but like you know what I'm saying though, right? Like I think
like that's part of what this podcast is, let's be honest.
Yeah, that's fair. Whereas like talking about the big Goron sword at Northern Middle School and like I rubbed everybody's nose in the fact that I had gotten it and didn't use game facts with like some 30-page printout that I ruined all of the black ink in our printer. But like
some of us just bought a Brady's unauthorized guide.
Where some stuff was just wrong.
But that's the thing, like, and even the fact that like things could be wrong, like you know, somebody at your table would tell you like one of those weird little myths like Luigi and Mario 64 or whatever, you'd spend 20 hours trying to get it only to realize it's not real. But like it did push you to explore in a way that I do. You don't really have that now.
It pushed you to explore. It was the right place, the right time, because like and there are those kind of things happen in Super Nintendo, but because of the 2D nature, because of the more limiting nature of most of those games, you couldn't explore, right? You couldn't explore that. But like when you came into a 64 game, it felt possible because all of a sudden the third dimension was unlocked. So like, what corner, what drawer, what piece of this castle had I not moved all the way around and searched?
Yeah, actually, pre 64, one of the games, and this is Sega Genesis, but Toe Jam and Earl had a negative level, and when I figured that out, I felt like the smartest person. Like, you had to travel to the corner of the first map and fall through a hole where everything else on the map was all water, so you would drown, and you would be taken to a secret level and get loaded up on shit. And like, yeah, no, I just found that because I was bored, because you could like uncover the map slowly if you had rocket skates or something.
Before we get into the rankings, anything else about this game that you haven't touched on yet that you want to get out there, out in the ether?
Yeah, it's a weird thing in the same vein of Link suddenly having an earring when he wakes up as an adult that's got me this time. Why in the Kokiri shop is the counter the height, like the height of an adult, so that they have to keep jumping up and down and look at it when it's a whole town of children people? Why would you build it like that? Like, it's a fun, because I was like, oh, it's a fun detail that he's jumping up and down to look over the counter, and I'm like, what? Like, who did they
who built this for you?
You're literally not supposed to be here if you're not the size of a child. Anyway, it's very strange, but I don't know. I don't think I have anything else to add that's not going to be part of my score hemming and hawing that I'm still undecided on.
Oh man, can we make Petro go first? Because I'm just dying to hear this.
Only if people want to keep hearing me ramble forever. But yeah, I'll let somebody else do a final thought before we get to that.
I mean, I think my final thought is just that like I do love the depth of like options and things to do and ways to like. It felt like, yeah, maybe the puzzles weren't perfect or maybe they weren't that like exciting or challenging, but like I did appreciate that there was just like so many layers of things that you could like do and explore and mess around with. Like so many side quests, so many. Honestly, it was probably my first experience with side quests too. Like it felt like there was more to do than just beating the game for the first time in me playing like video games.
I will actually, not as a final thought, and not to derail us from getting to the scoring right away, but Patrick bringing up puzzles brings up a good point that like it feels a bit odd that we would talk about this game and not bring up the adult water temple once during our conversation of it. But I am kind of curious what everybody thought about it, visiting it again versus, or like what they thought the first time as well.
Oh
like,
yeah, totally. I'm more than happy to talk about it. I stopped playing once I became a fucking adult because I got sick of the game and could not be bothered. So I remember actually not being that bothered by the water temple as a kid. And then everyone else complaining about it. I was like, yeah, I guess that was annoying. But honestly, I would have been happier if everything had to be changed by moving to the pause screen so that I could just have the C buttons as a fucking free roaming camera.
The water temple almost broke me as a child. I remember, I think I couldn't find the boss key, if I remember correctly. And I would basically turn on the game, go, and you know how they tell you to like try to get out of a maze, like you just always turn left until you can't anymore, and then you go back, you take the next left. Like that was my approach, like going into every room, trying to do everything, looking at every piece. And yeah, and I got there, but it was maddening.
Yeah, I almost was able to beat the game without looking at a guide until the water temple, because there was one key I couldn't find. And it was because there was like a block that floated up that revealed a hole that you could drop through. But I think because of the murky textures, I like didn't see that it was an opening. So as a kid, I remember tapping out and having to look it up and being upset about it. Going back to it, I also missed a key and got really frustrated and had to take a break. And it was another really like dumb thing that I missed. So my water temple experience, although weirdly, I was like able to cheese my fight with Dark Link using the hammer in a way that I had never thought of doing as a kid. And so it wound up, I don't know if I just got lucky, but that fight was like a breeze. And honestly, like the fun Lewie you talked about that really makes that fight memorable, I like didn't have, because I just kept going like this, and he was just like, and then he just died, and I was like, oh well, it's over.
So be it.
That's so funny. I mean, I didn't enjoy it as a kid, and again, I joked, but I did have the Brady's Guide for Ocarina of Time back then, and so really playing the game back as a child was just proof positive that I was good at following directions and really nothing else. But playing it like as an adult, I was like, okay, like I understood these puzzles and I saw what was going on. I felt like my main thought was that all of the whatever they called them in Breath of the Wild did the exact same mechanic, yes, just a lot more enjoyably. Like, right, like I was like, oh, that was interesting in Ocarina of Time. That was really the only one that the puzzle mechanics worked in that way. And again, it I don't know, like being like lever, or being like, here is like a like physical mechanic to how the entire temple is going to work that you'll need to understand, that they didn't really do with the other ones. And I was like, that idea is cool, but even going back through it, I was like, oh, it's still not, even as like an adult with more logic, I was like, this isn't fun to do this one. They figured out ways to make that fun. This still is.
Yeah. I do want to quickly note the 3DS version does make the water temple easier. It has ways that more easily demarcate, like basically like where the water level is going to like go like before you change it. And also the way the menuing works, because you have the second screen, the iron boots are like an equippable item that you can just switch on and off without having to go into pause menu every time and stuff like that. And actually some of the menuing stuff, Noah, you were complaining about is a lot better. The Ocarina is its own button, like all that stuff.
I'm actually arguing the other way around, is that I don't mind that method of going back and pausing to change everything. Like every Zelda before that,
you just want to
worked that way. I don't see why we needed to have it changed differently at the lieu of having the thing that would have made the game easier to play.
That's fair.
And also, would the D-pad get used for it? I don't remember if the D-pad got used for everything. That could have been quick buttons or control the camera instead.
Well, it really could have been. Well, yeah, I don't know.
All right. Well, those are our thoughts. Let's get into the real meat and potatoes of this. It's time to rank this game on the most important list, the definitive list that decides whether this game could even be the best game ever. Now, just a reminder of how this works. We're all going to give this game a rating. It is a rating we cannot have used before in the history of this podcast. And it is a rating we will never be able to use again. Once that number is given between 1 and 10, any amount of decibels you need, you can have, is given, it is locked in and good. Moving forward, because I feel like there's a little bit of a fatal flaw in how we've done this before. Moving forward, unless you guys use a number you've already used, I'm not going to tell you what you've ranked things, because it's your individual lists don't matter. It's the average list. It's the aggregate list. It's the list of the people that means something in the greater history of mankind. Princess Rudo can't save you, Patrick. That is too buxom of a young child for me to be comfortable with.
This adult Rudo thing.
Is that adult Rudo? Because that face looks like child Rudo.
No, it's adult Rudo. Weirdo.
Well, like when we say adult, like how old was what was 7-year jump?
Probably like
18.
Probably like 17-year-old Rudo.
18-year-old Rudo.
Right. Okay. Is that what you searched for?
No, actually, I searched for sexy Rudo.
Yeah, you searched for barely legal Rudo.
So yeah, once it's in, it's in. And once we've looked at the major list, we see where it lands. Any one of us can change our score once if we feel like the current landing is unfair. But that's it, which means if someone's an outlier, it's easy enough for someone else to swoop in and change it back to something wildly egregious. And then at the episode's end, it is historically stuck there. It is never moving anywhere again. That is what we as a group, as a people, as a nation, nay, as a world, have deemed the place of this game in history. So let's get to the ranking, starting with Michael Petrocelli.
Yes.
Okay, so
Uh-oh.
I'm not. I'm going to make a decision on this. I'm not going
I
to.
will say I already have my number lined up.
Doesn't matter.
If Michael, if you need more time.
No. I'm
Don't
making
give
a
it to him.
decision.
Yeah,
I
did
literally
pick
just took the average of the two numbers I was agonizing over. And honestly, it was the number I was thinking of anyway. So it's like that I was going to just go as a compromise. I'm going to give it a 7.6. I think I wanted to give it higher because I really wanted to reward it for being so groundbreaking and such kind of a classic. I think it still is classic in the same way that everyone's favorite band, the Beatles, is classic rock. It is. You cannot deny its classic status, even if you can find faults in it, and there are obvious things that haven't aged well. I think what keeps it under an 8 for me is that I would have a hard time recommending it to someone who had never played it before and was not familiar with controlling old 3D games without a lot of caveats. And I think that hurts it. So that's where I'm going to go. But still above God of War, because my God of War rating, I had to take into account the explicit sex mini game. And as horny as Ocarina of Time is, it did not have that.
All fair. Lewie says had some in the tank. Let's go.
Yeah. Actually, so I'm not too far off. I was gonna say 7.3 for myself. I haven't given that to anything.
No,
else
he's not.
Great. Okay. Yeah, no, it's right. It's super influential. We would not have a lot of what else we didn't have without it. It's a very playable game, but like it's not. It's the 3D version of the game isn't better than the best of the 2D versions, and it's not the best 3D version that's out there. And unlike the comparisons like Mario 64, it also like isn't like immensely enjoyable as a 2D conversion like of what was done. And so like it's good. It did a lot. It's serviceable, but like it is not still currently like the best thing out there. So 7.3.
All right, Patrick.
Have I done 8 yet?
Checking right now. You have not.
Okay, I'm giving it an 8. I'm actually, if we ever talk about Majora's Mask, that's going to be higher because I was actually somebody that liked Majora's Mask more than Ocarina of Time. I had them both, but I think 8 is like, I think it's a very solid game. I think unlike Petra, I think I would just recommend it to somebody. Also, maybe just to get them to then play Majora's Mask afterwards. But I think it's just, it's kind of like one of those staple games. That's why I'm giving it a solid number too, so that it kind of like, it feels like it's one of those like landmark sort of like where other games size up against type things. So yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, I will say, so before I had even looked at the list that I have, and I'm managing the list, so I do get to look at everything individually. I was going to give it a 6 until I realized I'd already given that to something else. And I was going to drop it lower initially. But I think from the conversations we've had about this and some of the conversations, my own biases going into it, I think has actually convinced me to go a little higher than I would have. So I'm actually going to give it a 6.2. I feel like that's probably low in the scheme of things, but even though we have all these decimals to work with, I still don't think there aren't a unnumberable amount of games that I would rank above it at this moment in time. That it is not that much better now than all these other games. I am going to take the historical context into account, but in general, I couldn't even finish playing it. Like it wasn't unenjoyable. It wasn't playing ET, but I definitely did not want to finish it. It wasn't playing Aladdin, but Aladdin was also maybe 2 hours out of my day, and this is a full 40-hour story. So like, where does that balance come in? That I couldn't finish it. If it had been a shorter game, maybe I would have. And I just didn't feel. I played it. Like I said, played it for 2 weeks, and then I went on to Jedi Fallen Order, where I had a much better time.
That game is very good.
So it's like, how can I compare that? So that's where it is, guys. I'm going to pop into the primary here.
Wait, can you say during this time what was the game that you had originally ranked as a 6, Noah?
Yes, it was GoldenEye 007.
Oh,
That I also wasn't the hugest fan of.
But another 64 gold standard. It's deeply influential. So
right.
Okay.
Which is funny because I mean, I'm thinking of all these like classic 64 games that like I've now revisited to and be like, like not below a 5, not bad enough that I'd be like, no, I'm never doing this again. But I also know that like Mario 64, I have come back to fairly regularly and would play. So it's not a virtue of just being old. Like there are games in this era that I would rank much higher. But yeah, both these just aren't doing it for me anymore. All right. So for those who are listening, not watching, I'm going to go from the bottom. We now have 15 games in the list right now. Working our way up, we have at the very bottom, E.T. for Atari 2600, Nights into Dreams for the Sega Saturn, Aladdin for the Super Nintendo, Sonic the Hedgehog for Sega, Aladdin for Sega. I should have changed that around. In our top 10, Duck Hunt for the NES, Crazy Taxi 3 in a row for Dreamcast Mobile Arcade, God of War for PS2 at number 6, in the number 5 slot for Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, followed by GoldenEye number 4, Castlevania Symphony of the Night number 3, WarioWare Micro Games Inc. at number 2. I could have done something about that as well. That's on me. That's on all of us. And Super Mario World. Still,
I'm gonna say having WarioWare ranked as the number 2 greatest game of all time is far less insane than having 3 versions of Crazy Taxi in what is a video gaming top 10. So
it just means we need to rank more games. That's where we're at. Maybe we'll do another episode that's another 10 pack again of classics or something.
And I'll say I'm not giving a separate score for the Ocarina of Time 3D version because Nintendo has not made that available to play on anything that's not a 3DS that is becoming increasingly more difficult to find. So
that's, I mean, again, that's fair. We can try to play that at another time, and we'll rank it its own separately. It is its own separate game. So Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is at a 7.27. Underneath it is God of War at a 6.6267. And above it is GoldenEye at a 7.385. How do you guys feel about that?
It's irking me. Its position is irking me.
I'm honestly very fine.
Are you, Patrick? Do you feel like it should be higher or lower?
Higher, but I don't know if I like my reasoning and my rating of giving it an 8.
Your rating doesn't matter. No, the world will not know your rating outside this podcast. It's whether or not you genuinely think that Ocarina of Time is a better game than GoldenEye. Do you think it is? You can go all out. You can rate it a 9 and shoot it way up there.
I was literally considering it. Michael, are you thinking anything? Is this bothering you?
It's bugging me a little bit. It's hard because I guess I would have fun going back and playing GoldenEye multiplayer, and Zelda doesn't have that advantage because it's just the single player experience. But the single player experience in Zelda is definitely better than the single player experience in GoldenEye.
The only thing that I'm going to say about it is that like Petra and I pretty much gave similar scores, and then the aggregate of what you and Noah put together, Patrick, is very much in line with that. Like that score is pretty much 3 people saying exactly the same thing about where they feel like the game falls.
The problem is sorry, go ahead.
I'm not saying either way about it, but if there's a purity to be had with all of this, it seems like that eventually everyone was kind of more or less in the same area for it. But but y'all do what you want.
No, it's okay. I'll stick
I
with
like
my
chaos.
Full disclosure, Pat, the higher score I was agonizing over was an 8.1 for Ocarina of Time, but that would put it in my own personal ranking above Symphony of the Night. And I think if I, again, going back to like, how does this game feel to play? And if I were to tell someone who had not played either game to pick one up, I can't deny that Symphony of the Night is
You
easier
would
to
tell
pick
them
up and
Symphony
play.
of the Night. Symphony of the Night was so frustrating.
Actually, that's a great point. I think Symphony. I'm with Petro in this, and that like another great game that was super influential for a lot of things, but isn't the best now. But I would say it is better.
Yeah,
Right.
so
I have a hard time saying I would put it above that.
again, I just want to say, Tro, your ranking does not no one gives a fuck about your ranking. Your ranking means nothing. Your ranking
Well,
is
you don't have to be
absolute
mean about
dog
it.
shit compared to what is the important ranking on this list. That being said, I agree with you. Now I'm in a weird.
You do, Mr. Symphony of the Night.
Oh yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
fair. I ranked it at 9. I stand by it. I should have ranked
That's
higher,
okay.
so it would have bumped it up. I will say this much: I am struggling because Patrick, like you, I would rather put this above Ocarina of Time. But the difference between Ocarina and Symphony of the Night is so tight. I'm afraid I'm going to bump it too high.
Oh, that's true. It is really close.
Oh wait! Oh my chaos!
and that scares the fuck out of me. So like,
man.
I'm not ready to commit just yet. 'Cause I might change it, but I'm afraid of going too high.
Oh, I love it though. No, fuck it. Make Ocarina of Time for me an 8.69. Have I used 8.69? Because I need to acknowledge the sexiness, but I need to bump it up because I think
That's
it's a better
true.
game.
It's those camera pans during the Great Fairy scene is what you're thinking of.
You have not done 8.69.
Give me 8.69. I'm doing
Oh, boy.
it.
Okay, where does that put? Nope, can't have that.
no.
Can't have that. Okay, shit.
This is what happens now.
I'm done. I've done my one. So,
But Noah, how are you going to adjust your score to get it between 7.4 and 7.3850
I ranked it. What did I do? I did a 6.2.
Yeah.
you did.
I was
enjoyed
initially
it as
going to
much
give
as
it
I
a
liked Crazy Taxi.
5.9 because I already ranked.
What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?
What do you guys think? If I do a 5.8, do you think that'll land it in the sweet spot?
Can't tell you.
Yeah,
Your rating doesn't
No,
matter.
I'm not worried about my rating. I'm worried about this rating. I'm asking for input from the larger group of what they think the math is.
You're
Just the
asking
math.
me. Yeah, Louie, you're the math expert.
Oh boy, this is.
So maybe a
I hope
5.9.
people are here for the math talk. What is the math talk portion of this podcast?
Maybe like what I'm not doing is typing it and seeing it, even though I control this list. So like I'm being faithful to the list. Like whatever I put in, I'm locking. The worst that happens, I go too low and it's under GoldenEye.
It's back under GoldenEye again.
And that's not the worst. Like
Right.
I'm much angry about it being above Symphony of the Night.
Symphony of the Night sucks. I played it for the first time as an adult. I hated
You
it.
played for the first. You played one section with no prior experience as the first time as an adult.
We are not here
had-
to litigate Symphony.
Never going to recommend that.
This is gonna be the
game.
one game we're gonna do. That I'm gonna force you to play and have you change your score.
Yeah.
It's gonna be your first redo.
Actually, wait. I think if you put it at a 6, we should be good now. I think like a flat 6 or
I
somewhere.
can't do a
around.
flat 6.
Okay, well, like right around.
Let me do a 5.9. If I do or
Okay.
5.9,
I think 5.99.
5.95.
I think 5.9. I think that does it.
Let's find out.
But I've had a lot of beer.
I'm not even gonna look at it until afterwards. So
I jammed a lot of
double-checking.
8% double IPAs during this song. So I'm real sorry.
about this.
All right.
I'm already upset.
No.
Oh,
It's tied.
Oh, it's
It's
tied.
the-
It's
wow.
tied now.
Whoops.
That's impressive.
Well,
Should have done 5.99.
I can't have this on a tie.
No, you just
Louis,
did it.
Louis or Tro.
then have me do 7.65 and let's be done with this.
Don't get too excited about it.
Yeah,
you know
it's
what? Then lower mine by 0.05.
for the purposes of how we want this pantheon to sit for all time. There you go.
Ugh.
by a hair.
I really want to come in now and just give it like a 0.1.
No, give it a 10. Go the other way.
Yeah, be like a lot of critics when the game came out.
Yeah. Or still, some of those on Metacritic are new, and people are still saying it's the greatest
People
game
out
of
of
all
their
time.
mind giving it a 10 now. I understand it being a classic, but let's be real.
Oh, that was close. That was drama. Too much. Pat, we can't have nice things when you act like this. This is what happens.
This is my fault.
Because you ranked Symphony of the Night too low, is that why?
Yes.
I don't like games like that. I'm not even a big Metroidvania fan. Like,
I was going to say we could play some of the Game Boy Advance ones because they put that collection out.
That's true. I do want to jump on that.
Aria of Sorrow, man, that's where it's at.
I'm over it.
Before we wrap this up, the list is here. It is official. Zelda Ocarina of Time, currently in the number 4 slot, going down our top 5: Super Mario World, WarioWare Microgames Inc., Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and GoldenEye. That scans to me.
Yeah, sure. WarioWare is just.
I mean, God. I don't know how much time have you guys sunk into WarioWare?
It's honestly a fair point. Like, first off, if it falls in the category of part of this podcast is comparing apples and oranges. Yeah. That's literally what we're doing. Right. And so my hours of fun from the multiplayer game of that, like, at the very least, equal the hours of fun.
I'm gonna make a bold claim and say that I think I've probably logged more hours into playing WarioWare than I have Super Mario World. Like, I would actually put money down that I've played more of WarioWare.
Oh, that's why Dr. Krygor took so many victories.
Yeah, that's why I'm significantly better than all of you. But also, like, I don't know, like, so it being 2 right now isn't outrageous.
Like, look, that was part of our initial ranking, and I feel very justified in what I gave it, even if it feels silly looking at a best games of all time listing now. But like, you're right, like fun per capita or whatever of like hours I've played. Like, I had fun all the time that I played that game.
We still go back to it. Before we close things out, I don't know, anything you guys want to plug, promote? Patrick, I see that picture behind you as part of a Patreon, it looks like.
Yeah, whatever. I think
credit the artist. Come on.
I don't know. Here, I'll just pull it up on my computer. It is DANNHH.
That easy.
Oh, sorry, no. Patreon.com/DANNIH4. There you go. This is apparently from the $1 tier, but I did just pull it from a Google image search, so I can only imagine what the higher tiers will get you.
It's almost kind of like right-clicking on an NFT.
Yeah, I was about to say Patrick purchased the NFT of this. It's an investment.
You can't have it. No.
Great. Anyone else want to plug? Put your socials out there. Promote yourselves.
Boy,
there was your thing froze right as you started, and so I think the part of the actually promoting yourself got missed.
Oh, great. Okay,
it got scrubbed from the call.
Then they'll never know, but that's fine. If you find me, if you Google Louis Thomas and figure out where to find me, come at me with your Legend of Zelda opinions, and I will fight you all day.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you my Twitter handle is _Chelly. I never use it unless I want to despair at the void of humanity. But maybe I'll go on there. This gets released and people want to start sharing video game opinions. I'd love to hear from people.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm Patrick BC Molloy on Instagram and Twitter.
Patrick before Christ Molloy.
Exactly.
Before Christ Molloy. Whew. I was nervous because I came in hot. And I'll be curious to see what you guys have to say about our thoughts, our opinions. And then you would realize it doesn't matter because it's already in the list. It's etched in stone. Like Moses with the tablets, you can't change it. This is our will. This is the people. This is what we've all agreed to. But I think you'll still be happy about it. I don't think there's bad decisions here. I think where it ended up makes sense for all of us as a community. But God, this was a lot of fun. This was so much fun to dive into this game and really pick it out. You know, this podcast was always intended to be more of a comedy thing. Just a chance for us to like make jokes and shoot the shit and bring people on. But I'm slowly realizing it's turning into much more of an actual like analytical discussion. And it gives me chills. I dig it. I love it. It's good. I'm having a blast. I hope you guys are having a blast listening to it because we wanted to up the game. Let's up the game. We wanted to make you guys a bigger part of the community. And I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you. Every episode, I plan on asking a little bit of a question that I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on. And the question of the month right now is, how much should historical impact weigh on a game's ranking? Again, how much should historical impact weigh on a game's ranking? Is it important? Is it important, or is that a moment in time and things change over time? If you're watching this on YouTube, let us know in the comments of this video. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, go ahead and leave it as part of a review on this podcast. That's right. Go ahead and give this podcast a review and then answer the question. Our favorite reviews we'll read right here. I'm going to read one right now. We got one here on the Apple Podcast app titled Great Vibes, Great Hosts. Oh, you're going to make me blush. Love this new podcast. It's fun and relaxing and a fun new format for a gaming podcast. Can't wait for more episodes. Love to hear it. Love to hear it. That was left to us by The New Dance. I'm not going to pretend like I don't know who that was. I believe I know that person personally, but it still means just as much to me the same. And maybe I don't know you personally. Please leave in a review. It helps us out. It helps get this podcast out to more people, raise it in the rankings, get people. It tells Apple and Spotify and iHeartRadio and Stitcher that people should listen to this. So thank you all so much. Before we go, you can go ahead and follow me across the spectrum of social media. I'm Boss Monster Kaiju everywhere but Twitter, where I am Boss Monster Kaiju. I'm on YouTube, Twitch, TikTok. I'm too old to be on TikTok, but I'm on TikTok. We've got a lot more stuff coming to the channel beyond this podcast. This podcast was just the start of something bigger, and I've got some stuff I'm working on that will hopefully be releasing that way too. So get excited, get tingly. I know I'm feeling a little tingly because there's some great things on the horizon, including next month's episode. Released the first Monday of every month. Next month's episode, we go bigger than we've ever gone. That's right. That's right. We are doing two, not one, but two modern games. This is not just a retro gaming podcast. This is an every gaming podcast. And jumping in to two of the biggest games, I'd say, in the last 5 years. Two of the biggest games in the last 5 years. Jumping back into Hyrule, comparing The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild for the Nintendo Switch to From Software's open world opus, Elden Ring. Two huge games. One, a Game of the Year winner. Another, this year's potential Game of the Year winner. Huge, mixing them together and coming out with where they land on the list. I hope you're excited. I know I am. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a blast. Until next time, guys, stay cool, stay hip, stay heavy. The Best Game of All Time is an independent production, hosted, produced, and edited by Noah Waterman. Theme music by Peter Rowland. If you want to learn more, go visit www.thekaijulounge.com.